Welcome to the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Join us each week as we sit down with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management and author of Your Fiscal Physical, Ryan Nelson. Tune in to gain valuable insights and practical tips as we simplify complex financial concepts into digestible lessons. From budgeting to retirement planning, this podcast is your go-to resource for mastering financial literacy.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. I am here with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management, Ryan Nelson. Ryan, how are you today?
I am doing well. How are you doing today?
I am doing pretty solid, I would say, man. I was diving into your, when I was getting ready for these podcasts, I always kind of look through your book, Your Fiscal Physical, find it on Amazon, and kind of look at the different sections that might equate to this podcast episode we're going to do. And I always get very excited because I see like there's in the book. It's so, I mean, I don't know how many pages your book is, but it's not all inclusive.
Sure.
It's like little snippets of things that kind of like wet your whistle to certain areas. And I'm looking forward to this week's episode because it kind of I don't know if you covered this in your book like that we're going to talk about, and I don't think so. And so it's kind of something I was like, oh, I'm going to learn something brand new today. And
let's do it.
We're going to talk about the relationship between interest rates and bond prices. Interest rates seems to be a word that's thrown out everywhere, man.
Yeah.
Nowadays, like you on the news, you can't turn it on without seeing something about interest rates. And
right.
So I'm curious to see how you're going to explain the difference between interest rates, bond prices, how they're related, and all the stuff that goes into that.
Let's do it. So yeah, like you said, I mean, these are things that are kind of used on, I think, the news and media and social media all the time. And so interest rates and bond prices do have a relationship. It's what we would call an inverse relationship. And so what I find is, somebody who watches a lot of maybe financial news has heard that interest rates and bond prices have an inverse relationship. So let's first talk about what that means. Mm-hmm. So an inverse relationship simply means they move in different directions. So as one goes up, the other goes down. As one goes down, the other goes up. So if interest rates go up, that means bond prices typically go down. If interest rates go down, bond prices typically go up. So I'd say a lot of people that I talk to, surprisingly, are aware of this inverse relationship. When we talk about we've had a podcast a few weeks ago about the progressive tax system. I'd say less people know about the progressive tax system and how the U.S. actually taxes their money than knows about this inverse relationship with interest rates and bond prices. But what I do find is nobody really knows why that relationship exists. And so I thought we could take some time today to maybe kind of go over the why behind this and kind of think through logically why this might make sense. And
No, I think that's great, man, because like just saying something has like an inverse relationship, I'm like, I know what an inverse relationship is, but why?
Yeah.
Why would they be connected like that, I suppose?
Exactly. So let's dive in. So we've here recently historically been through a kind of a period where interest rates started going up, right? Mm-hmm. So 2 years ago, interest rates were really, really low. Let's say maybe you could buy a bond and maybe that bond had a 3% interest rate on it, right? Mm-hmm. So that means if you had $100,000 in this bond, it would pay you $3,000 a year. So 3% of $100,000. So you have a $100,000 bond, pays you 3%. It's going to pay you $3,000 a year. So a few years ago, maybe we bought this put $100,000 in this bond that paid us $3,000 a year, 3%. And so now we fast forward to today. So interest rates have gone up over time. And so in theory, that would mean my bond price has gone down. So let's think about this. So if I had $100,000 in this bond, let's fast forward to today, my bond pays 3%. And maybe I say, you know what? I'm ready to sell this bond, these bonds. I don't want to hold them anymore. I want to free up my $100,000. So I say, hey, who wants to buy my bonds, right? And let's pretend you were in the market to buy. So you had $100,000. You're saying, hey, I want to go buy some bonds. And so over this time period, though, let's say interest rates have gone up from the 3% a couple of years ago, and maybe currently they're at, 6%, we'll call it. We'll say they've doubled. So now interest rates, we'll say, are at 6%. So if you have $100,000 and you're in the market for bonds, would you rather buy my bonds from me at 3%? Or would you rather just go buy some nice fresh bonds that are going to pay you 6%? My bonds will pay you 3%, $3,000 a year. Or you could go buy the brand new fresh bonds paying 6%, paying $6,000 a year. Which of those two would you prefer?
I mean, it seems pretty simple math even for myself that you're going to take the one that pays 6%. Like that.
Yeah, 100%, right? Yeah, absolutely.
100%?
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly right. So now my bonds aren't very desirable.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to buy my bonds that only pay 3%. You can just go buy some new bonds that pay 6%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody wants my bonds. But now if I come to you and I say, hey, Aaron, I got $100,000 worth of bonds, they pay 3% every year. I'll sell it to you for let's say $90,000.
Mm-hmm.
You might start to say, "Oh, okay, that's a little more interesting because now I only have to invest $90,000. I still get the full $3,000 a year because I would be what's called selling it at a discount, and so you would get this $100,000 effectively bonds for only $90,000. And so what that means is two things: your $90,000 now generates $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, effective to you, it's actually kind of more than 3% because you didn't put down $100,000, you only put down $90,000. So you're really getting a little bit more than 3%, right? The other nice thing here is when that bond matures, you're still going to get all $100,000 for it. So if you bought it from me for $90,000, eventually when this bond matures, you're still getting all $100,000. It's still a $100,000 bond. I'm just trying to get out of it early before it matures. And so again, I'm selling it to you on a secondary market for a discount. So maybe I say, okay, I'll sell it to you for $90,000. And you say, okay, let me think about this. Yeah, I could maybe pay. So I could either go buy a new bond for $100,000. I'd get $6,000 at 6%. I'd get $6,000 a year, and then at the end of this, I'd just get my $100,000 back. Or I could buy Ryan's bonds, pay him $90,000. I'm only going to get $3,000 a year, but when this matures, I'm going to get $100,000 back instead of $90,000. You may say, "Okay, Ryan, I'll take you up on that deal. I'll buy your bonds from you at $90,000, right?"
Mm-hmm.
But we can see right there now my bond price, it depreciated. It went from $100,000 down to $90,000, right? Or realistically, in this example, it probably followed even more. I might only be able to sell them for $80,000 or $75,000, right? So when bond prices went up, or when interest rates went up, bond prices fell. So interest rates went from 3% to 6%. My bonds became less desirable on the open market, so the price itself fell.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of why the relationships exist. But I will also repeat, though, I bought that. When I bought it, it was paying me 3% or $3,000 a year. It's continuing to pay me $3,000 a year, and when it does mature, it's still going to pay me my whole $100,000. So if I buy this 3%, these 3% bonds for $100,000 2 years ago, and I just hold it all the way to maturity, the fact that the interest rates have gone up don't really affect me whatsoever. I can just hold it to maturity, and I'm sort of locked into that 3% for the whole time, right? It's only if I want to sell it. If I want to sell it, the price I would be able to sell it for has declined.
Mm-hmm.
I would no longer be able to get, say, $100,000 for it. I'd get some amount below that, right? Maybe $90,000, maybe $80,000, maybe $75,000. The market will sort of determine what that is. But that hopefully helps give you a decent example of why when interest rates go up, bond prices fall. And the exact opposite of that is true as well. If I had bought that 3%, if I had $100,000 in paying 3%, and over those next 2 years, instead of interest rates going up to 6%, if interest rates drop to 1%, it'd be the exact opposite of everything, right? Nobody would want to go buy a brand new bond only paying you 1% when they could buy mine paying them 3%. So somebody might say, "Oh, Ryan, I would pay you $110,000 to get this 3% bond off your hands," right? Because otherwise I'm just going to go buy a new bond that only pays me 1%. So again, as interest rates fall, my bond that pays a little bit more would become more valuable.
Gotcha.
Yep. And so that's why there's that inverse relationship, and that's why when interest rates go up, bonds will drop. When interest rates go down, bonds prices would go up.
Interesting. And so I guess a question that I would have with that is how feasible is it to, like, I guess almost play the market with that, I suppose, because like as you get closer to retirement, potentially you want to, shift your portfolio to more bonds and less stocks, and like is it feasible to, like, should you be like, "Oh wow, now I could get I should sell this for $90,000 because I can get, a 6% bond instead at this point. Like, is that something that's feasible to do, or is it more just better to plug in this, stay the course as far as like what you have right now?
Yeah, you could probably talk to 10 different people and get 10 different answers. My investment philosophy would be exactly that: stay the course, right? So, this is kind of a common conversation we have with clients when this happens. So maybe we had $100,000 in a 3% bond. The client was thrilled when we got that 3% bond. They were happy with that 3% bond, right? The fact that interest rates have gone up to 6% hasn't affected their goal or their plan whatsoever, right? So they could just continue to hold that bond until maturity. When they look at their statement, the value of that bond will have declined. They will see like it went from 100,000, it's only worth 90,000 now. But the important thing to remember is what your statement shows you is it's just only showing you what the value would be as if you sold everything today. So when interest rates went up over the last couple of years, there'd be a lot of clients where their bond holdings got decimated, right? So maybe they had $1 million in bonds. They look back at their statement. It's like, gosh, I only have 800,000, right? That's an extreme example, but I only have 800,000. That's crazy. The reality is they hadn't lost anything. They still owned all the same bonds, right? So as long as they were willing to stay the course, they still owned all the same bonds as before. It was still paying all the same percentages as when they committed to it and bought it. And as long as they hold it to maturity, they'll still get all the same amount back. So it's a phenomenal example of just staying the course. And the market's going to do its thing. Stocks go up and down, bonds go up and down. But again, these gains or losses are only recognized once you sell, right? So if you bought that $100,000 of bonds and you hold it, you might see a statement that shows it's depreciated in value. Again, that's only if you sold it. If you continue to hold it to maturity, you'll get your whole, in this example, $100,000 back, right? I would tell you, you probably don't really want to be trying to play or time the market there. And everything is sort of being priced at market value. So it would be hard to sell those bonds and go buy new bonds. Everything at that point would be priced back into market value. So there's not a lot of what we'd call arbitrage, which would be an opportunity to make like free money.
What was that word?
Arbitrage.
Oh, cool. I haven't heard that before.
It's just cool. When you can, like, if I could, like a non-market related example of arbitrage would be like if I could go, if you told me you were willing to buy a dozen eggs from me for $10 a dozen, and I could go and I found somewhere where I could buy eggs for $5 a dozen. I could go buy a bunch of eggs for $5 a dozen, sell them over to you for 10, and that $5 I make, it's like a guaranteed profit. That's what we call arbitrage. And so it's fine. It's really hard to find examples of arbitrage in the market because everything is priced at kind of market value. And so, I would tell you, the best example or kind of your best strategy when dealing with these bonds is probably to stay the course.
Cool. I love it, man. And that really feeds into your financial philosophy and kind of this financial philosophy of, obviously everybody's different. Everybody's situation is different. If you're, right on the cusp of retirement and you're going to need to sell these, whatever, there's different things that could come up. But overall, like it's good to kind of paint that picture of like, hey, what you have, because I'm guilty of this when I look at my statements sometimes for my 401k, which I do like once a year. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I'm like, it's so far down. And it's like, well, okay, or so far up. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, but it doesn't really matter if your plan is being followed. If you're on your course and you're staying that course, being able to stick with that and have the resolve to be like, cool, there's going to be down years and up years, but at the same time, like if you stick with your plan and you're consistent with it, you'll get to where you want to go. And I think that plays in really well with like the bond idea of like, and I think that's something you've taught me is like, Don't worry about this. Like if we're being financially responsible with what you're doing, you're following all the right steps of the plan that you set up, you're going to get where you need to be, like barring some unforeseen circumstances, obviously.
Yep. 100% agree.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, that's great, Ryan. I appreciate the insight as always. We're going to go ahead and pause here, be back on the other side with a personal question, and hang tight with us.
And now to put the personal in personal finance.
Welcome back to the personal section of the Fiscal Physical podcast. I am here, as always, with Ryan, and we are going to dive into a nice, light, fun one here. Ryan, as far as our personal question, something that you've probably been asked throughout your life and everybody's kind of thought about because it's, comes up in conversation. But if you could have one superpower, what would that superpower be? Anything you want, my friend.
Yeah, that's always such a hard question. I certainly don't have a great answer for it. I'll tell you one thing that I would love that's not a superpower at all, but it would just be like a photographic memory. Just being able to remember everybody's names, their kids' names, their spouses' names, like what the last vacation they went on and stuff. Like, gosh, it's so flattering when you tell somebody some like obscure fact, right? And then they like bring it up to you like later. You're like, how the heck did you remember that, right? Yeah. Like, it's like, God, they must really like me, right?
Yeah, right.
Imagine having that ability to like just remember everything and like be able, like I think that'd be an awesome like. I don't think you'd call that a skill, and it's not a superpower, but
in my eyes, it is like.
But for an actual superpower, I'd love to be able to just like not travel at the speed of light, but just like what would you call that? Just like have to avoid travel, just be able to like transport.
Just
I guess
get
for lack
somewhere
of a,
where you want to. You're like, hey, I want to go to Mexico this weekend. Boom.
Yep. There. Yep. No, there's no planes. You're not going through, you're not waiting in line to get your luggage checked and then waiting in a TSA line and then, getting to the gate and, going, stressing out that your plane's late and you think you're going to miss your connection and then praying that your bag finally makes it. And, it'd be awesome just to, be able to just transport from one location to another. I like absolutely love traveling.
Yeah.
But I hate the act of travel, right? So whether that's sitting in a car for 8 hours or sitting on a plane in airports for 12, I would just love to be able to just transport from one location to another. Oh, yeah. What about yourself?
You got me really thinking with the memory thing, and I think it's called an eidetic memory, I think is what it is. There's an eidetic versus but a whole different thing. But it is interesting to think because that is super cool when you're able to do that. You're like someone pulls some fact out that you're like, oh yeah, like from 10 years ago. You're like, holy Snopes, how did you remember that? Like, absolutely. So having that, I feel like that's kind of a superpower. But I would probably, myself, I would really like to. I think the idea of flying, like to get somewhere, I think would be. But I would also, you kind of got me thinking with teleportation, like as far as like. But I like the idea of being able to fly just in general. Oh yeah. Because I'm not a very fast runner. I'm not the best swimmer. Like I think that if I was able just to fly somewhere, just be like, cool, I'm there, I'm over there, and just the idea of it and like being able to look down on the world. Like I love seeing like on a camera from like a plane or something like that, or from space, like where you can look down and everything's small and you can see all the areas, like when you're flying in a plane, like you're like, oh wow, there's Mount Rose and stuff like that. So I think the ability to fly would be I think it'd also be problematic because I'd probably be under surveillance all the time and radar and all these different other things. But I think that being able to fly would be the one that I would really choose.
Nice.
I think
you'll have to try one of those squirrel suits.
Yeah. Oh, now we're talking. Yeah. That's the thing is I feel like I'd have to also be really, really confident in my abilities because there's a lot of stuff that's in the air. Like there's a lot of planes that are flying out of everywhere and like satellites and different things. So I'd also have to be pretty careful with it. But anyway, man, I appreciate sharing the insight there. As always, we'd like to kind of humanize behind the mic here. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in, listening. Hopefully this episode has been insightful for you as the other ones have been. Please go back and check out other episodes as well, too. I feel like every episode we do, you can learn something, so please take advantage of that. And as always, if you have any questions, concerns, topics, email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com, and I'll let you finish us off here, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aaron, and as always, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us for the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Until next time, happy listening. And as always, stay the course. If you have a question or topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, subscribe to the podcast to ensure you never miss an episode. And consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite platform. This helps other listeners like you find the show. For more resources, you can visit Alchemy Wealth Management's website at www.alchemywealth.com or find your Fiscal Physical, the book, on Amazon. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that personal finance is just that, personal. Please don't take anything we say as advice. The preceding content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not an offer or a solicitation, nor should it be construed or relied upon for tax, legal, or investment advice. It doesn't consider your personal financial situation or objectives and may not be suitable for you.